They say an omega cannot defy an alpha's command. They say the weak must bow before the strong, that fate is carved in stone, and bloodlines determine destiny. But what happens when the alpha who orders your punishment is your fated mate? What happens when ancient royal blood sleeps in veins thought common? And what happens when the symbol of sovereignty itself, burning, blazing, undeniable, appears on the skin of the one condemned to die? This is not a story of submission. This is a story of awakening. And before we begin, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss a single moment of what happens next. This tale will grip you by the throat and not let go until the very last word. And listen. When you're done, tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug. Because after this story, you're going to need it. The first snow of winter had come early to the Silver Pine territory, blanketing the ancient forest in silence. But in the center of the pack grounds, where the great stone circle stood as it had for 1,000 years, there was no silence. There was only the sound of a young woman's ragged breathing, the crackle of torches against the frozen air, and the murmur of hundreds of pack members gathered to witness judgment. Aino knelt in the center of that circle, her wrists bound with silver-laced rope that burned against her skin. She was 23 years old, an omega without family, without status, without protection. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves around a face marked with bruises, not from her captors but from the crime she had committed. Her simple gray dress, the uniform of the lowest-ranking pack members, was torn at the shoulder. She kept her eyes down, as she had been taught to do her entire life. Around the circle, the pack watched. Some faces showed pity. Others showed contempt. Most showed nothing at all because this was simply the way of things. Omegas who stepped out of line were punished. The hierarchy was sacred. The alpha's word was law. And their alpha had spoken. Väinö stood at the edge of the circle, tall and imposing in his black ceremonial robes. At 28, he was the youngest alpha to lead the Silver Pine pack in 2 centuries, and everything about him radiated power. His ice-blue eyes were as cold as the winter sky. His jaw was set like granite. His dark hair, longer than tradition dictated, moved slightly in the bitter wind, the only thing about him that seemed remotely alive. He had been alpha for 3 years, since his father's death in the territorial wars with the Eastern Packs. 3 years of iron rule, of strict hierarchy, of crushing any hint of rebellion before it could take root. The pack was stronger for it, everyone said so. Safer. More unified. But they also whispered that something had died in Väinö the day he took the alpha's oath. That he had become more stone than man, more law than heart. Beside him stood his beta, Kaleva, a man of 40 with silver threading through his beard and eyes that had seen too many of these judgments. He held the scroll containing the formal charges, though everyone present already knew what they were. Aino, daughter of no house, omega of the lowest circle. Väinö's voice rang out across the stone circle, and though he did not shout, every word carried with absolute authority. You stand accused of transgression against the natural order. 3 days ago, you entered the alpha section of the forest without permission. You hunted game reserved for ranked wolves. And when confronted by the Gamma Patrol, you refused to submit. A ripple went through the crowd. The charges were serious. Each one alone warranted severe punishment. Together they could mean death. Aino's fingers dug into her palms, but she did not raise her head. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, could feel the pull of the alpha's presence like a physical force trying to drive her face into the dirt. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to bare her throat, to whimper, to beg for mercy. But she thought of the child. 3 days ago little Helka, a 7-year-old omega like herself, had been sick with fever, her wolf too weak to hunt, her human body too frail to venture out in the early winter storms. Helka's mother had died in childbirth. Her father had been killed in the territorial wars. The pack provided for orphans, technically, but omegas were always last in line. And by the time the meager rations reached the lowest circles, there was often nothing left but scraps. Helka had been starving. So Aino had done the unthinkable. She had shifted in the dark hours before dawn and slipped into the northern forest, the Alpha's forest, where the game was plentiful and protected. She had hunted a winter hare, quick and clean. She had brought it back to Helka, watched the child eat for the first time in days, seen color return to those hollow cheeks. And then the Gamma Patrol had found her, caught her scent on the forbidden trail, dragged her before the Pack Council. "Do you deny these charges?" Väinö asked, and there was something strange in his voice now, something that made Aino's wolf stir uneasily inside her chest. She raised her head slowly, and for the first time she looked directly at her Alpha. The world tilted. It was like being struck by lightning, like falling from a great height, like drowning and being pulled to shore all at once. Her wolf surged forward with a howl that echoed only in her mind, a single word that changed everything. Well, no, it couldn't be. The moon goddess would not be so cruel as to bind an omega to an alpha who was about to condemn her. Fate would not play such a vicious trick. But as Aino stared into Väinö's ice-blue eyes, she saw the exact moment he felt it too. Saw those eyes widen fractionally. Saw his entire body go rigid. Saw his wolf rise to the surface, turning his irises to molten silver. For 3 heartbeats, the entire pack grounds fell into absolute silence. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was holding its breath to see what would happen next. Väinö's jaw clenched so hard she could see the muscle jump beneath his skin. His hands, which had been clasped behind his back, curled into fists. And then, with visible effort, with a force of will that seemed to cost him something vital, he wrenched his gaze away from hers. "I do not deny them," Aino heard herself say, and her voice was steadier than she had any right to expect. "I entered the Alpha's forest. I hunted protected game. And I did not submit to the patrol." Another ripple through the crowd, this one tinged with shock. Omegas did not speak so directly. They did not meet the Alpha's eyes. They certainly did not admit to crimes with such defiance. Kaleva shifted uncomfortably beside Väinö. "Alpha," he murmured, low enough that perhaps only Aino's wolf-sharp hearing could catch it. "The bond is irrelevant," Väinö cut him off, and his voice was like a blade. He turned back to Aino, and this time he was careful not to meet her eyes directly. "By our law, by the traditions that have kept this pack strong for generations, such transgressions cannot be tolerated. The hierarchy exists for a reason. Without it we descend into chaos. Without order we are no better than rogues." He paused, and Aino could see the war happening behind those cold eyes. Could see him fighting something. Fighting her, fighting the bond, fighting perhaps even himself. "The punishment for your crimes," Väinö continued, and each word seemed to be torn from somewhere deep and agonizing within him, "is 20 lashes with silver-lined cord to be administered at dawn. And following that, exile from the Silver Pine territory. You will be stripped of your pack bonds. You will be made rogue. You will have until the next full moon to cross our borders, and if you are found within our lands after that time, the penalty will be death." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Exile was a fate worse than death for a wolf. To be severed from one's pack was to be severed from one's soul. And for an omega with no family, no allies, no strength to speak of, it was a death sentence delivered in slow motion. "This is the judgment of your Alpha," Väinö said, and his voice had gone completely flat now, emptied of all emotion. "This is the law." He turned to walk away, to end the proceeding as was traditional after a judgment was pronounced. But he had only taken 2 steps when Aino spoke again. "Then your law is unjust." The entire pack grounds erupted. Väinö froze mid-step. "Silence!" Kaleva roared, his own alpha authority flooding outward. "You will not speak unless—" "Let her speak," Väinö said quietly, and something in his tone made every wolf present fall silent immediately. He turned back to face her, and this time he did meet her eyes, and the mate bond between them flared so bright that Aino gasped with the force of it. "Let the Omega speak. I would hear what makes her so bold as to question 1,000 years of tradition." It was a challenge and a trap all at once. If Aino backed down now, she would be seen as weak, her earlier defiance as nothing but empty posturing. If she continued, she would be adding insubordination to her list of crimes. But as she knelt there in the stone circle, hands bound, facing exile and death, Aino realized she had nothing left to lose. "I hunted in the Alpha's forest to feed a starving child," she said, and her voice carried clear and strong across the grounds. "Little Helka, who is 7 years old, who is Omega like me, who has no parents to provide for her." The pack's food distribution had not reached the lowest circles in 4 days. She was dying. "I could not let her die." "The pack provides for all its members," Väinö said, but there was something uncertain in his voice now. "The pack provides for the strong," Aino countered. "For the ranked. For those who matter. But we Omegas." She looked around at the crowd, at the other Omegas standing at the very back, their eyes wide with fear and recognition. "We get the scraps. If there are any. We are told to be grateful for our place, to accept our fate, to bow and submit and never question why we are valued less than other wolves." "The hierarchy," Väinö started. "The hierarchy is killing us," Aino said, and now there was fire in her voice, years of suppressed rage and sorrow breaking free. "We are not allowed to hunt. We are not allowed to train. We are not allowed to defend ourselves. And when we are hungry, when we are sick, when we are dying, we are told it is the natural order. That we are weak, so we must suffer. That we are Omega, so we deserve nothing." She struggled to her feet, though the silver-laced rope burned her wrists and her legs shook with exhaustion. But she stood there in the center of the judgment circle and looked her alpha, her mate, directly in the eyes. "You want to exile me for breaking your law," she said softly. "But your law already exiled me. Your law exiled every Omega in this pack the moment we were born. You can whip me. You can cast me out. You can even kill me. But you cannot make me regret saving that child's life. You cannot make me bow before a system that would rather let a 7-year-old girl starve than allow someone like me to cross an invisible line in the forest." The silence that followed was absolute and crushing. Väinö stared at her, and something was happening in his eyes. Something like ice cracking, like stone beginning to crumble. His wolf was howling inside him, she could sense it, crying out for its mate even as the alpha in him recoiled from her defiance. "You speak of justice," he said finally, and his voice was rough, strained. "But justice requires order. Without hierarchy, without structure, the pack would tear itself apart. The strong must lead. The weak must follow. This is not cruelty. This is survival. And if survival requires us to abandon our humanity," Aino asked, "if survival means letting children starve, then perhaps we have already lost what we are trying to protect." Väinö's hands were shaking now, she could see it. The great Alpha, who had never shown weakness, who had ruled with iron control for 3 years, was trembling. "Enough," he said, and it came out almost as a growl. "I have given my judgment. Dawn, you will be punished. And then you will be cast out. This is my final word." He turned and strode from the circle, his ceremonial robes billowing behind him. Kaleva hurried after him, shooting one long, unreadable look back at Aino. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves. 2 guards came forward to lead Aino back to the holding cells beneath the packhouse. As they pulled her away, she caught sight of a small face in the crowd. Helka, the child she had saved, tears streaming down her cheeks. It was worth it, Aino thought as the guards dragged her into the darkness. Even if she died tomorrow, it was worth it. She did not know that above ground, in the Alpha's private chambers, Väinö had smashed every piece of furniture within reach and was now standing at his window with blood dripping from his knuckles, staring out at the stone circle where his mate, his goddess-damned mate, was condemned to suffer because of his own law. She did not know that the Alpha's judgment was not final. Not yet. They came for her when the sky was still dark, in the hour between night and dawn when the world held its breath. Aino had not slept. How could she? She had spent the long hours of darkness sitting on the cold stone floor of her cell, arms wrapped around her knees, feeling the mate bond pulse in her chest like a second heartbeat. It was agony and ecstasy in equal measure. Now that she knew, now that she had looked into Väinö's eyes and felt the recognition, the bond was alive, demanding, desperate to be completed. Her wolf whined constantly, pacing inside her mind, crying out for her mate even as her human half remembered that her mate was the one who had condemned her. The moon goddess had a twisted sense of humor. When the cell door opened, Aino expected to see the guards who had brought her here. Instead, she found herself looking up at Kaleva, the beta, whose weathered face was drawn with concern. "It is time," he said quietly. Aino rose to her feet without being told. She would not cower. She would not beg. She had meant every word she said in the judgment circle, and if she was to be punished for speaking truth, then she would face that punishment with her head high. But as Kaleva led her through the torchlit corridors beneath the packhouse, he spoke in a low voice meant only for her ears. "What you said yesterday," he murmured. "About the omegas. About the food distribution. Is it true? Has the lowest circle been without rations for 4 days?" Aino glanced at him, surprised. "Yes, has been happening more frequently. Since the territorial wars ended and we took in refugees from the eastern packs, resources have been stretched thin. But the omegas are always the first to go without." Kaleva's jaw tightened. The alpha was not told of this. Would it have mattered? The beta was silent for a long moment. Then, 3 years ago when Väinö's father was still alive, when Väinö was simply the heir. He was different. Ormer. He laughed. He questioned things. He challenged his father on policies he thought unjust. Kaleva shook his head slowly. But the night he took the alpha's oath, something changed. It was like he locked away everything soft inside himself. He became the law. Nothing else. "Why are you telling me this?" Aino asked. "Because you are his mate," Kaleva said simply. "And if there is anything in this world that can break through the walls he has built, it is that bond." "But Aino." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "The punishment will be severe. 20 lashes with silver-lined cord. It will scar. It may even kill you if you are not strong enough." "I know." "And you still spoke against him, knowing what it would cost." Aino met the beta's eyes steadily. "Some things are worth dying for." Kaleva studied her for a long moment, and something like respect flickered across his face. "Perhaps you are stronger than any of us knew," he said softly. Then he resumed walking, leading her toward the stairs that would take them back to ground level. They emerged into the gray pre-dawn light to find the stone circle already filled with pack members. Even more than yesterday, word had spread of the Omega who had defied the Alpha, and everyone wanted to witness what happened next. The whipping post stood in the center of the circle, an ancient piece of dark wood worn smooth by countless hands that had gripped it over centuries of punishment. And standing beside it, holding the silver-lined cord, was Väinö himself. Tradition dictated that the Alpha deliver judgment and punishment personally when the crime was serious enough. But tradition also dictated that the Alpha show no emotion, no hesitation, no mercy. As Aino was led into the circle, she searched Väinö's face for any sign of what he was feeling. But his expression was completely blank. His eyes distant and cold. If he felt the mate bond screaming between them, he gave no indication. He looked like a statue carved from ice, beautiful and terrible and utterly remote. "Aino, daughter of no house, Omega of the lowest circle," Kaleva's voice rang out. "You have been judged and found guilty of transgression against pack law. Your punishment is 20 lashes with silver-lined cord, to be followed by exile from this territory. Do you understand?" "I understand," Aino said clearly. "Then take your position." 2 guards unbound her wrists and led her to the whipping post. They removed her torn dress, leaving her in only a thin shift that would provide no protection from the silver. They bound her wrists to the post, stretching her arms above her head. Aino closed her eyes and thought of Helka's face, of the child eating that winter hare, strength returning to her small body, of all the other Omegas who had suffered in silence, who had never dared to speak, who had accepted their fate because they believed they had no other choice. If her pain could plant a seed of doubt in the Alpha's mind, if her defiance could make even one wolf question the justice of their hierarchy, then it would be worth it. Behind her, she heard Väinö approach. Felt the heat of him even through the cold morning air. The mate bond surged, recognizing his nearness, begging her to turn around to look at him to speak his name. She kept her eyes closed. 20 lashes, Väinö said, and his voice was flat, emotionless. Count them aloud. If you lose count, we begin again. Aino's fingers tightened on the post. I understand. There was a moment of terrible silence. Then she heard the whistle of the cord cutting through air and white-hot, searing pain as the silver-lined cord struck her back. It burned and cut simultaneously, and Aino's wolf howled in agony. But she did not scream. She would not give them that satisfaction. 1, she gasped out. Another whistle. Another strike. The pain doubled, tripled. 2. The third strike split the skin. She felt blood begin to run down her back, hot against the cold air. 3. By the 5th lash, her vision was starting to blur. The silver was in her bloodstream now, burning through her like poison. But still she counted, her voice growing weaker but never stopping. 6. In the crowd, some wolves had turned away, unable to watch. Others watched with grim satisfaction, seeing the natural order reinforced. And a few, just a few, watched with dawning horror, as if seeing the hierarchy they had always accepted in a new and terrible light. 7. Väinö's hands were shaking. He couldn't stop them. Each strike of the cord felt like it was flaying his own skin, his own soul. The mate bond was a living thing between them, and every blow he delivered sent echoes of her pain directly into his heart. His wolf was going insane inside him, thrashing against his control, howling for him to stop, to drop the cord, to cut her down and never let her go. But he was Alpha, and the Alpha's word was law. 8. Behind the impassive mask he wore, Väinö was dying. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to stop this, to tear apart the very laws he had sworn to uphold. But if he stopped now, if he showed weakness, showed mercy, the pack would fracture. Wolves would question his authority. And without strong leadership, without absolute order, the pack would tear itself apart from within. At least that was what he told himself. 9. Aino's voice was barely a whisper now. Blood soaked through the back of her shift, dripping onto the frozen ground. The silver was spreading through her system, making her wolf retreat deep inside her, whimpering and weak. But still she counted. 10. Halfway. She could make it to 20. She had to make it to 20. 11. The world was starting to fade at the edges. She could feel consciousness slipping away, her body reaching the limits of what it could endure. But she thought of Helka, of every Omega who had never had a voice. 12. And then something changed. The 13th strike fell, but before Aino could speak, a new voice rang out across the stone circle. Stop! Väinö froze, the cord still raised for the next strike. He turned to see old Lempi, the pack's eldest member, stepping forward from the crowd. She was ancient, her hair white as the snow around them, her face creased with 90 years of living. She had been a respected wolf once, before age had stolen her strength. Now she was Omega in all but name, relegated to the lowest circles like Aino. Elder, Väinö said, his voice strained. This is a formal punishment. You cannot. I can speak, Lempi said, her voice surprisingly strong for someone so frail. Or have you made laws against that too, Alpha? A ripple of shock went through the crowd. No one spoke to the Alpha that way. No one dared. But Lempi was not finished. She walked slowly to the center of the circle, each step deliberate, until she stood beside Aino's bleeding form. I have lived through 8 Alphas, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the grounds. I have seen this pack in times of plenty and times of famine. I have seen war and peace, justice and tyranny. And in all my long years, I have never been more ashamed than I am right now. Elder, Kaleva started, but she cut him off with a wave of her hand. This girl, Lempi said, gesturing to Aino, broke your law to save a child's life. And for this you would break her. You would exile her. You would make her rogue and leave her to die in the winter wilderness. She turned to look at Väinö directly. Tell me, Alpha, what happened to the boy who once brought food from his own plate to the Omega's quarters? Who argued with his father about the injustice of the hierarchy? Who swore he would make things better when he came to power? Väinö's face had gone pale. That boy learned that sentiment and weakness are luxuries a leader cannot afford. No, Lempi said softly. That boy learned to be afraid. Afraid that if he showed compassion, he would be seen as weak. Afraid that if he questioned tradition, he would lose control. Afraid that if he let himself feel, he might have to admit that everything he has built is founded on cruelty. The silence was absolute. I invoke the right of truth, Lempi said, using the ancient words that every wolf knew but few ever heard spoken. I am Omega, am elder, and by the old laws, the laws that existed before hierarchy hardened into tyranny, I have the right to speak truth to power without fear of retribution. Väinö's hands were shaking violently now. The right of truth was ancient indeed, older than any living wolf's memory. Could not be refused. Could not be challenged. Once invoked, the speaker was under the protection of the moon goddess herself. Speak then, he said hoarsely. Lempi turned to address the entire gathered pack. Every word this girl spoke in her judgment was true, she said. The lowest circles have been going hungry for months. Resources are distributed by rank, and by the time they reach us, there is nothing left. We have learned to suffer in silence because we have been taught that our suffering doesn't matter. That we are weak, so we deserve nothing better. She pointed to the crowd, where other Omegas were beginning to step forward. Ilmari, there has been denied medical treatment 3 times because healers must prioritize ranked wolves. Little Annie lost her mother last winter because no one thought an Omega's life was worth the herbs that might have saved her. Ani was beaten by a Gamma for daring to look him in the eye, and when he reported it, he was told he must have deserved it. With each name, each story, more Omegas stepped forward. Wolves who had hidden in the shadows their entire lives were suddenly visible, their faces showing years of suppressed pain and anger. This is the truth of your perfect hierarchy, Lempi said to Väinö. This is what your law protects. Not order, not strength, but the right of the powerful to prey upon the weak without consequence. Väinö looked out at the crowd of Omegas, really looked at them perhaps for the first time. He saw the hunger in their faces, the old bruises, the hollow eyes. He saw children who should have been playing but instead looked like they had forgotten how to hope. And he felt something inside himself begin to crack. The hierarchy, he started, but his voice had lost its conviction. The hierarchy is a lie we tell ourselves, Lempi said gently. A lie that says some lives matter more than others. That some wolves are born to suffer so that others can thrive. You have enforced this lie with such dedication, Alpha, because you were afraid of what would happen if you admitted the truth. And what truth is that? Väinö asked, and he sounded lost like a child. That you are not your father, Lempi said softly. That strength and compassion are not opposites. That you can be Alpha without being cruel. Pause. And that the Omega bleeding at the whipping post is your mate. Gasps erupted throughout the crowd. Väinö's eyes went wide. Did you think we couldn't see it? Lempi asked. Did you think we couldn't feel the bond blazing between you? Every wolf here with any sensitivity at all knows what you are to each other. And every wolf here has been watching you try to destroy the one person the moon goddess chose for you, all in the name of maintaining your precious control. Väinö stood frozen, the cord hanging loose in his hand. His carefully constructed walls were crumbling, and he couldn't seem to stop it. Couldn't seem to rebuild them fast enough. Finish the punishment or don't, Lempi said. Exile her or keep her. But know that whatever you choose in this moment will define what kind of alpha you truly are. The kind who rules through fear and sees his people as ranks and numbers. Or the kind who remembers that every wolf in this pack, from the highest beta to the lowest omega, is worthy of dignity, care, of love. She stepped back, her piece spoken, the right of truth fulfilled. Väinö looked at the cord in his hand. Looked at Aino, who was barely conscious, her back a ruin of blood and silver burns. Looked at the pack, hundreds of faces watching him, waiting to see what he would do. And then he did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He made a choice that wasn't about control. The cord fell from his fingers and hit the frozen ground with a soft thud. In 3 strides, Väinö was at the whipping post. His hands shook as he cut through the ropes binding Aino's wrists. She collapsed immediately, and he caught her, gathering her broken body against his chest as carefully as if she were made of glass. "Get the healer," he roared, and his voice cracked with emotion, real raw emotion that he had locked away for so long. Now! Kaleva was already running. Väinö sank to his knees in the center of the stone circle, cradling his mate against him. Her blood soaked into his ceremonial robes. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. But she was alive. "I'm sorry," he whispered against her hair, the words for her alone. "Goddess, forgive me, I'm so sorry." And that was when it happened. A light began to glow from Aino's skin, a soft, golden radiance that grew brighter with each passing second. Väinö pulled back slightly, his eyes wide with shock, as the light concentrated on her left shoulder blade, burning through the blood and torn flesh. The pack watched in stunned silence as a mark appeared on Aino's skin, searing itself into existence with golden fire. It was a symbol known to every wolf, present in every history, sacred beyond measure. The royal seal of the moon goddess. A crown of silver surrounded by 13 stars, the mark that had not been seen in the werewolf world for over 300 years. The mark that denoted true royalty, not of pack hierarchy but of ancient bloodline. The mark that meant the bearer carried the direct line of the moon goddess herself. Aino was not just an omega. She was a lost royal. And the punishment Väinö had inflicted upon her had awakened the dormant power in her blood. The royal seal burned for 13 seconds, one for each star in its crown, and when the light finally faded, Aino's wounds had begun to heal themselves. Not completely, not yet, but the bleeding had stopped and the silver burns were already starting to fade. Väinö stared at the mark on her shoulder, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. It was impossible. The royal bloodline had been lost centuries ago, wiped out in the Great Purge when the packs had fractured into territories and hierarchy had replaced the old unity. No one with royal blood had walked among them in living memory. But the seal did not lie. Could not lie. It was the moon goddess's own mark, and it chose only those who carried her lineage. "By the goddess," Kaleva breathed, arriving with the healer Tully at his side. The beta dropped to one knee automatically, an instinctive gesture of reverence. Around the circle, others were doing the same, wolves kneeling without fully understanding why, responding to a pull older than memory. The healer, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and capable hands, pushed through her shock and immediately began examining Aino's injuries. "Get her to the healing rooms," she ordered. "Quickly. The seal is helping, but she's still lost a great deal of blood." But before anyone could move, Aino's eyes fluttered open. They were no longer the soft brown they had been before. Now they glowed with that same golden light, ancient and knowing and vast. She looked up at Väinö, who was still holding her, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made every wolf present feel it in their bones. "Put me down." It was not a request. Väinö's hands loosened automatically, and he helped her to stand even though she swayed dangerously. The healer reached out to steady her, but Aino held up one hand, and somehow that simple gesture was enough to keep everyone at bay. She stood in the center of the stone circle, her torn shift still soaked with blood, the royal seal glowing softly on her shoulder. And despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the silver still burning in her veins, she stood tall. 300 years, Aino said, and her voice was her own but also something more, as if she was speaking with the weight of generations behind her. 300 years since the last royal walked among the packs. Do you know why we disappeared? Silence. No one dared answer. We were hunted, Aino continued, turning slowly to address the entire gathered pack. When the Great Purge came, when the packs fragmented and turned on each other in their hunger for power, the royal families were the first to be targeted. Because we represented something the new alphas could not control. Unity. Quality. The truth that no wolf is inherently worth more than another. She gestured to herself, to her omega status, to the blood marking her as the lowest of the low. So they killed us. Hunted us down and slaughtered us until the bloodline was thought extinct. And in our absence they built this. She swept her hand across the pack grounds. A hierarchy that places some wolves on pedestals and grinds others into the dust. A system that calls cruelty order, and oppression tradition. The golden light from her seal pulsed, and with it came a wave of power that made every wolf in the circle take an involuntary step back. Every wolf except Väinö, who stood frozen. His ice-blue eyes locked on her face. The royal bloodline hid, Aino continued. Those few who survived went into the lowest circles, disguised themselves as omegas, as the powerless and forgotten. Because who would think to look for lost royalty among those deemed worthless? Her lips twisted in a bitter smile. We survived by becoming invisible. By bowing our heads and accepting abuse. By letting the world believe we were exactly what the hierarchy said we were. Weak, worthless, expendable. Lempi stepped forward again. Tears streaming down her weathered face. Your mother, she whispered. Kielo. I knew her. She died in childbirth, they said, and I thought. The old woman's voice broke. I thought I was the only one left who remembered the old ways. But she passed the blood to you. She kept the line alive. Aino turned to the elder, and something soft passed through her glowing eyes. You protected me, she said quietly. When I was a child. When others would have let me starve or be beaten, you found ways to help. Small things. A bit of food here, a warm blanket there. You never said why. I swore an oath to your mother, Lempi said. To watch over her daughter if anything happened to her. But I didn't know. I never suspected you carried the royal mark. It should have manifested when you first shifted at 13, but it was suppressed, Aino said, placing a hand over her heart. By years of silver exposure. By malnutrition. By the constant stress of survival. The royal power sleeps when the body is too weak to handle it. It only awakens when. She trailed off, looking down at her bloodied back, at the wounds that were still healing themselves with golden light. When the body is pushed to its absolute limit. When death is imminent. Then the blood recognizes that survival requires awakening. She turned back to Väinö, and the mate bond between them flared so intensely that several wolves cried out, feeling the echo of it. You nearly killed your mate to maintain your hierarchy, Aino said softly. But in doing so, you awakened a power that will shatter it. Väinö's face had gone ashen. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally managed. I didn't know. Would it have mattered? The question hung in the air like a blade. If I had been just an omega with no royal blood, no ancient power, would my life have mattered then? Would that child's hunger have mattered? Would the suffering of every wolf in the lowest circles have been worth addressing? She waited, and when he didn't answer immediately, she nodded slowly. That's what I thought. No, Väinö said, and his voice was raw with emotion. No, you're wrong. What you said yesterday in the judgment circle, it reached me. Every word. I spent last night tearing apart my chambers because I couldn't stop hearing your voice, couldn't stop seeing the truth you forced me to face. He took a step toward her, his hands reaching out then falling back to his sides, uncertain. I was going to stop the punishment. This morning before dawn, I sat in my office and wrote a decree abolishing the exile. I couldn't go through with it. Couldn't hurt you again. And yet you struck me 13 times, Aino said quietly. Because I'm a coward, Väinö said, and the admission seemed to cost him everything. Because even as I wanted to stop, wanted to change, I was terrified of what it would mean. Terrified that if I showed mercy, if I bent the law even once, everything would fall apart. That I would become my father. Weak, indecisive, the alpha who let the pack nearly destroy itself through lack of control. He looked around at the gathered wolves, at the hundreds of faces watching this moment unfold. "My father was kind," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "He was compassionate. He listened to his people, tried to make everyone happy. And because of that kindness, because of that compassion, wolves took advantage. Ranked members hoarded resources. Territory disputes went unresolved. The pack fractured into factions, each pulling in different directions. Väinö's hands clenched into fists. When the eastern packs attacked, we were unprepared, divided, weak. And my father died because he couldn't make the hard choices, couldn't enforce discipline. So when I took the Alpha's oath, I swore I would never make his mistakes. I would be strong where he was weak. I would enforce order even if it meant being cruel. I would be the Alpha the pack needed, not the Alpha I wanted to be. And in doing so," Kaleva said quietly from behind him, "you became exactly what you feared. Tyrant who confused control with leadership. Cruelty with strength." Väinö's shoulders sagged. "I know. Goddess help me, I know." The healer Tully cleared her throat, breaking the charged silence. "Alpha, forgive me, but the girl needs treatment. Royal blood or not, those wounds need proper attention." But Aino shook her head, still standing impossibly tall despite her injuries. "Not yet. First, there are things that must be said. Things that must be witnessed." She raised her voice, addressing the entire pack once more. "The royal seal grants me certain rights under the ancient laws. Rights that supersede pack hierarchy, that cannot be denied by any alpha, no matter how powerful." Her golden eyes swept the crowd. "I invoke the right of challenge." Gasps erupted. The right of challenge was legendary, part of the oldest stories, but no one had invoked it in centuries because no one with the authority to do so had existed. Väinö's eyes widened. "You would challenge me for Alpha?" "No," Aino said. "I challenge your laws. The hierarchy itself. I challenge the system that has allowed the suffering of omegas to continue unchecked for generations. And by the ancient covenant, you must answer that challenge not with force, but with truth." She stepped closer to him, close enough that only he could hear her next words. "I don't want your position, Väinö. I don't want to rule. But I will not let this continue. So you have a choice. We can do this the hard way, with me using my royal authority to tear down everything you've built brick by brick. Or we can do this together. You can acknowledge the flaws in your system and work with me to change them." "Together," Väinö echoed, and there was something desperate in his voice. "After what I did to you, you would still." "I felt the mate bond too," Aino said softly. "From the moment our eyes met, I felt it. And despite everything, despite the pain and the anger, that bond remains. The moon goddess chose us for each other, and she does not make mistakes." He paused. "But being mates doesn't mean I will submit to injustice. It means you will have to rise to meet me as an equal. Or we will be enemies, and that will destroy us both." Väinö stared at her for a long moment, this Omega who had become a royal, this woman who should have been broken but instead stood blazing with ancient power. And he felt the last of his carefully constructed walls crumble into dust. "Tell me what you need," he said hoarsely. "Tell me how to make this right." Aino turned back to the crowd, and her voice rang out with authority that made even the strongest alphas in the pack lower their heads. "Effective immediately, food distribution will be reorganized. Every wolf, regardless of rank, will receive adequate nutrition. The Omega quarters will be inspected, and any substandard living conditions will be remedied within the week. Medical treatment will be provided based on need, not status." She paused, letting those words sink in. Several ranked wolves looked uncomfortable, but no one dared object. "Training and education will be made available to all pack members who wish to participate. Omegas will no longer be barred from learning to hunt, to fight, to defend themselves. We will be given the tools to be more than victims." Väinö nodded slowly, his mind already racing through the logistics, the changes that would need to be implemented. "It will be done." And finally, Aino said, her voice dropping but losing none of its power, there will be a council. Not just the Alpha and Beta but representatives from every circle, Gamma, Delta and yes, Omega. Decisions that affect the entire pack will be made with input from every level of our society. This doesn't mean the end of leadership. It means the beginning of wisdom. She swayed suddenly, the golden light flickering, and Väinö was there instantly, catching her before she could fall. The exertion of awakening her royal power, combined with her injuries and the silver still in her system, was finally overwhelming her body. Enough politics, Tully the healer said firmly, pushing forward. The girl needs rest, herbs, and probably 3 days of sleep. Royal seal or not, she's still mortal. But as Väinö moved to carry Aino toward the healing rooms, she gripped his arm with surprising strength. One more thing, she said, her voice fading but still determined. Helka. Child I saved. I want to see her. I want to know she's well. I'll bring her to you myself, Väinö promised. Once you're stable. Once you're. Now, Aino insisted. Please. Väinö looked to Kaleva, who nodded and disappeared into the crowd. Minutes later, he returned with little Helka, the 7-year-old Omega with wide, frightened eyes. The child took one look at Aino's bloodied form and burst into tears. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm sorry you got hurt because of me. I didn't mean. Hush, little one, Aino said, reaching out with a trembling hand to stroke Helka's hair. You did nothing wrong. Do you hear me? You were hungry. You needed help. And there is no shame in that. She looked up at Väinö, then around at the gathered pack. There is only shame in a society that would punish someone for offering help. Helka threw her arms around Aino's waist, careful of her injuries, and clung there. And as Aino held the child, something shifted in the pack. You could feel it like a change in the wind, centuries of accepted cruelty beginning to crack, light seeping through the fissures. Come, Väinö said gently, addressing both Aino and Helka. Let's get you both somewhere warm and safe. As he helped them from the circle, Lempi's voice called out one last time. The royal seal has been revealed. The lost bloodline has returned. And the pack will never be the same. It was not a warning. It was a promise. The healing rooms were in the east wing of the pack house, where morning light streamed through tall windows and the air always smelled of herbs and clean linen. Tully had the best room prepared, usually reserved for high-ranking wolves, and she shot a warning look at anyone who might object. Väinö carried Aino himself, with little Helka trailing behind them like a shadow. The child refused to leave, even when gently encouraged, and eventually the healer gave up and let her stay. Lie on your stomach, Tully instructed as Väinö laid Aino carefully on the bed. This is going to hurt, royal blood or not. The silver has to be drawn out, and then we need to clean the wounds properly before they seal. Aino nodded, too exhausted to speak. The golden light from her seal had faded to a soft glow, and now she looked less like an ancient royal and more like a young woman who had been pushed far beyond her limits. Väinö stood by the bed, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides, clearly wanting to help but not knowing how. His ceremonial robes were still stained with her blood. His face was haggard, years seeming to have been added in the space of a single morning. Alpha, Tully said quietly, mixing a dark poultice that smelled of bitter herbs. You should change. Clean yourself up. There's nothing you can do here. I'm staying, Väinö said flatly. The healer raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. She had been with the pack long enough to know when an alpha had made up his mind. And besides, she could feel the mate bond humming in the room, almost visible in its intensity. As Tully began to work, applying the poultice to draw out the silver, Aino bit down on a leather strap to keep from screaming. The pain was excruciating, worse, somehow, than the original whipping had been. Silver was poison to werewolves, and removing it felt like being burned from the inside out. Väinö's hands gripped the edge of the bed so hard the wood began to crack. He could feel every spike of her pain through the bond, could feel her struggling not to cry out. His wolf was howling, pacing, demanding he do something, fix this, make it stop. Talk to her, Tully said without looking up from her work. Distract her. Tell her a story. Väinö opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I'm not good at stories. Then tell her about yourself, the healer said. Tell her about the boy Lempi mentioned. The one who used to bring food to the omegas. Väinö was silent for a long moment, watching Aino's hands fist in the sheets, seeing her entire body tense against the pain. And then, haltingly, he began to speak. I was 12 the first time I questioned my father's laws, he said quietly. There was an omega boy named Juna about my age. He had been caught playing with alpha pups. Apparently that was forbidden. The punishment was 10 lashes. Väinö's jaw tightened at the memory. I watched it happen. Watched them whip a 12-year-old child for the crime of playing. And I asked my father why. Why such a harsh punishment for something so innocent? He paused, and Aino made a soft sound that might have been encouragement. Little Helka, sitting in a chair by the window, watched with enormous eyes. My father told me that hierarchy must be maintained from a young age, Väinö continued. That if we allowed omegas to forget their place, they would grow up confused about their role in the pack. It was kindness, he said, to teach them early. Väinö's voice was hollow. I didn't believe him. But I was just the heir, not the alpha. I had no power to change things. Tully finished with the first stage of treatment and began carefully cleaning the wounds with water infused with healing herbs. Aino's breathing was harsh and ragged, but she was listening. So I started sneaking food from the alpha's table, Väinö said. Taking it to the omega quarters at night. I don't know what I thought. That I could make things better in small ways, I suppose. That I could be different from my father. What happened? Aino asked, her voice muffled by the leather strap. I got caught, Väinö said with a bitter laugh. One of the gammas reported me to my father. He was furious. Told me I was undermining the social order, showing weakness that enemies would exploit. He said if I couldn't be trusted to maintain hierarchy, I wasn't fit to be alpha. Väinö looked down at his hands. He made me watch 50 punishments in a row. Omegas being whipped, beaten, humiliated. Made me watch until I understood, he said, why compassion was a luxury we couldn't afford. How old were you? Tully asked, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. 14. Silence filled the room, heavy with the weight of that revelation. A 14-year-old boy, forced to watch endless suffering until his compassion broke. After that I stopped questioning, Väinö said quietly. I learned to be hard. To see the pack as a machine that needed control, not as people who needed care. And by the time I became alpha at 25, I had become exactly what my father wanted. A leader who would maintain order at any cost. He looked at Aino, at her bloodied back, at the wounds he had inflicted in the name of that order. Until you, he said softly. Until you stood in that judgment circle and made me see what I had become. What I had been running from all these years. Aino turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. The leather strap fell from her mouth. It's not too late, she said. To be the person you wanted to be. To be the alpha this pack deserves. I whipped you, Väinö said, and his voice cracked. I hurt you. My own mate. How can you possibly? Because I understand, Aino said simply. I understand what it's like to be trapped by circumstances, by fear, by the weight of expectation. You were taught that cruelty was strength, just as I was taught that submission was survival. We were both shaped by a broken system. She paused, gathering her strength. But we don't have to stay broken. We can heal. Together. Väinö reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand. The mate bond flared at the contact, warm and right despite everything. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Probably not, Aino said with the ghost of a smile. But the moon goddess paired us anyway. So I suppose we'll have to make the best of it. From her chair by the window, Helka spoke up for the first time. Are you a princess? She asked Aino, her child's voice breaking the heavy atmosphere. Aino laughed weakly. Something like that, little one. And he's a prince. Helka pointed at Väinö. He's an alpha, Aino corrected gently. But if you're a princess and he's an alpha, and you're mates. Helka's face scrunched up in thought. Does that mean you're going to be the alpha lady? The term is Luna, Tully said, beginning to wrap clean bandages around Aino's back. The alpha's mate becomes Luna of the pack. Though given that our alpha just tried to exile his mate, the politics of this situation are going to be complicated. I'll make it right, Väinö said firmly. Whatever it takes, I'll. He was interrupted by a commotion outside the healing rooms. Raised voices, the sound of many feet. Kaleva burst through the door, his face grave. Alpha, the beta said urgently. We have a problem. Väinö's expression hardened instantly. His alpha instincts rising to the surface. What kind of problem? The Northern Border Patrol just returned. They've captured 3 rogues trying to cross into our territory. Kaleva glanced at Aino, then back to Väinö. They're asking for sanctuary. And they're claiming to have information about the royal bloodline. About others who survived the purge. The room went utterly silent. Aino pushed herself up despite Tully's protests, the bandages white against her torn skin. Others, she said, her voice sharp with sudden intensity. There are others like me. That's what they claim, Kaleva said. But Alpha, it could be a trap. Rogues will say anything to gain entry to pack territory. We should interrogate them, verify their story before. Bring them here, Aino said, and her voice carried that harmonic quality again, the royal authority that made even ranked wolves straighten reflexively. Bring them to me. Now. Väinö started to object to site security concerns, but then he caught the look in her eyes. The desperate hope warring with fear. And he realized that despite everything, despite the pain, the betrayal, the royal seal burning on her skin, Aino was still just a young woman who had believed herself alone in the world. Bring them, he echoed Kaleva's orders. But under heavy guard. And if they make one wrong move, one hint of threat. Understood, Alpha, Kaleva said and disappeared. 10 minutes later, 3 figures were escorted into the healing room by a contingent of armed guards. They were thin, dirty, dressed in ragged clothes that spoke of months, maybe years, spent in the wilderness. 2 men and a woman, ranging in age from perhaps 20 to 40. They looked like they had been through hell. But when the woman saw Aino, saw the royal seal glowing softly on her shoulder, she dropped to her knees and began to weep. Blessed moon, the woman whispered. It's true. The rumors were true. A royal has awakened. Aino stared at them, her heart pounding. Who are you? The woman looked up and her eyes, brown like Aino's had been before the awakening, held centuries of sorrow. My name is Kaka. This is my brother Tavi and his mate Aino. We are. She swallowed hard. We are descendants of the royal guard. Our ancestors swore oaths to protect the royal bloodline, even unto death. When the purge came, when the royal families were slaughtered, a handful of guards survived. They went into hiding, scattered across territories, hoping that somewhere, somehow, the bloodline had survived. And you've been searching, Aino asked. For generations, Tavi said, speaking for the first time. His voice was rough, exhausted. We are taught from birth, every child born to the old guard families, taught the signs of royal blood, the markers that would indicate a survivor. Taught to watch and wait and search. But the blood was suppressed, Aino added. His eyes were sharp despite his haggard appearance. The few survivors who carried it learned to bury it deep, to live as omegas, to never let the power awaken. Because awakening meant being found. And being found meant death. Kaka looked at Aino with something like reverence. But you awakened anyway. 3 days ago, every wolf with even a drop of guard blood felt it. Felt the surge of royal power breaking through suppression. We have been traveling without rest, following that call, praying it wasn't too late. Too late for what? Väinö asked, his voice hard with suspicion. The 3 rogues exchanged glances. Then Kaka spoke, and her words changed everything. Too late to warn her, she said quietly. Alpha Väinö, you are not the only one who felt the royal awakening. Every pack with old bloodlines, every alpha who has studied the histories, will have felt it too. And they will be coming. Aino's eyes widened. Coming for what? For you, Kaka said simply. Because the royal seal doesn't just mark you as royalty. It marks you as a threat to every hierarchy that exists. Every alpha who has built power on the backs of omegas, every pack that thrives on inequality, they will see you as the end of their world. You pause. Which means they will do anything to kill you before you can change it. The room erupted into chaos. Guards shouting, Väinö demanding details, Kaleva barking orders. But through it all, Aino sat perfectly still, her hand pressed against the royal seal on her shoulder. She had thought awakening her power would be the end of her troubles. She had been wrong. It was only the beginning. Night had fallen over the Silver Pine territory, bringing with it a darkness that felt heavier than usual. In the Alpha's private meeting chamber, a room lined with maps and ancient texts, a council of war had gathered. Väinö stood at the head of the table, his expression grim. Around him sat Kaleva, Tuli the healer, Lempi the elder, and the three rogues, Kaka, Tavi and Aino, who had been given temporary sanctuary while their information was verified. And in a chair that had been brought in specifically for her, wrapped in warm furs despite her protests that she was well enough to stand, sat Aino. The royal seal on her shoulder pulsed with a soft golden light, visible even through her bandages. In the hour since its awakening, Tuli had confirmed what they all suspected. The seal was not merely decorative. It was actively healing Aino's wounds at an accelerated rate, infusing her body with ancient power that was gradually overwhelming the silver poisoning. But it was also broadcasting her location like a beacon to any wolf sensitive enough to feel it. Tell us everything, Väinö said to the rogues. Leave nothing out. Kaka nodded wearily. She and her companions had been fed, cleaned up, given fresh clothes, but exhaustion still lined their faces. The royal bloodline was hunted to extinction 300 years ago, during the Great Purge, she began. Or so the histories claim. In truth, a handful survived. Maybe a dozen individuals scattered across the territories. Most were hunted down within the first decade. Some lived longer, hiding in plain sight as omegas, never using their power, never revealing themselves. How many survive now? Aino asked quietly. We don't know, Tavi admitted. The guard families, those of us who carry the oath, we've been searching for generations, but it's like looking for shadows. The blood can skip generations, lie dormant for lifetimes. We found perhaps 3 individuals over the last 100 years who showed signs of royal lineage. What happened to them? Väinö asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. 2 were killed before their power could awaken, Aino said flatly. Found and executed by alphas who feared what they represented. The 3rd. She chose to suppress her own blood. Used silver and pain and sheer force of will to keep the royal seal from manifesting. She died at 32. Her body destroyed by the constant battle between her power and her determination to hide it. The room fell silent, everyone absorbing the weight of those words. Generations of slaughter. Centuries of hiding. A bloodline forced to deny itself or die. But Aino's seal awakened, Lempi said, her aged voice cutting through the gloom. Why now? Why her? Because she was pushed past the point of survival, Kaka said, looking at Aino with a mix of admiration and concern. The royal blood is tied to preservation, both of self and of others. It awakens when the bearer faces death in service of protecting someone weaker. That's why it manifested during the punishment. She turned to Väinö, and there was no judgment in her gaze, only exhaustion. You were killing her for the crime of saving a child. In that moment, her blood recognized that she would rather die than submit to injustice. And so it awakened, because that is what royal blood does. It rises to defend those who cannot defend themselves. Väinö's hands clenched on the table. And now she's a target. Now she's the target, Tavi corrected. Alpha, do you understand what the royal seal represents? It's not just a symbol of bloodline. It's a beacon of change. The old texts say that when a royal awakens, the world shifts to accommodate them. Pack bonds realign. Power structures crack. The status quo becomes impossible to maintain. Which means, Kaleva said slowly, every alpha who benefits from the current hierarchy will see her as an existential threat. Exactly, Kaka confirmed. And we have intelligence suggesting that several packs are already mobilizing. The Ironwood pack to the east. The Shadow Peak pack in the mountains. The Riverside pack to the south. They'll be sending delegations, or assassins, within the week. Aino listened to all of this with a strange calm. She had spent her entire life as prey, as someone hunted by circumstance if not by design. The idea that she was now being hunted for what she represented rather than what she lacked was almost darkly amusing. Let them come, she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Let them come, she repeated louder this time. I won't hide. I won't suppress my blood like those who came before me. If my awakening threatens their precious hierarchies, then those hierarchies deserve to fall. Aino, Väinö said carefully. You're still recovering. You're not strong enough to. To what? Fight an army. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm not strong enough for that either way, royal blood or not. But I'm strong enough to stand for what I believe in. Strong enough to be visible when generations of my bloodline had to be invisible. She pushed herself to her feet, ignoring Tully's protest. The furs fell away, revealing her bandaged form, and the royal seal blazed brighter, responding to her determination. For 300 years my ancestors hid in shame and fear, Aino said, addressing the room. They taught their children to bow, to submit, to never reach for the power that was their birthright. And I understand why, survival demanded it. But I am tired of surviving. I want to live. She turned to Väinö, and the mate bond between them hummed with intensity. You ask me what I need. This is what I need. I need this pack, our pack if you'll have me, to be the first. The first to embrace change. The first to show that hierarchy and compassion can coexist. The first to prove that protecting the weak doesn't make you weak. And when the other packs come, Väinö asked, when they demand we hand you over or face war, then we fight, Aino said simply. Not with claws and teeth, though that may come, but with truth. With the evidence of what we've built here. With proof that a pack can be strong without crushing its omegas. Lempi rose from her seat, her ancient bones creaking but her spirit blazing. The girl is right, the elder said. I have lived long enough to see cycles repeat, tyranny followed by rebellion, followed by new tyranny. The hierarchy we have now is no different from the one before, or the one before that. Someone must break the wheel. Why not us? Why not us? Kaleva echoed thoughtfully. Then to Väinö. Alpha, I will follow your decision. But I think you should know that she's already changing us. In the hour since her awakening, I've had 17 wolves from various ranks come to me with concerns about the omegas, offering to share resources, asking how they can help. The seal's power isn't just physical, it's awakening something in all of us, reminding us of what we could be. Väinö looked around the table, seeing the resolve in every face. Even the 3 rogues who had lived in exile for years looked ready to fight for this cause. And then he looked at Aino, his mate, his challenger, his conscience made flesh, and felt something shift inside him. I have spent 3 years ruling through fear, he said quietly. 3 years believing that control was the only thing standing between this pack and chaos. But standing here now, knowing that we may face war, knowing that we may lose everything. He paused, searching for the words. I realized that I was wrong. Control isn't strength. It's just fear in a different mask. He moved around the table to stand before Aino, and slowly, deliberately, he dropped to one knee. The entire room gasped. An alpha kneels to no one, Kaleva whispered, shocked. An alpha kneels to his Luna, Väinö said, looking up at Aino with eyes that had finally thawed, finally come alive. Aino, bearer of the royal seal, Omega who became royalty, woman who refused to break even when I tried to shatter you. I am sorry. For the pain I caused. For the blindness I chose. For the years I spent building walls when I should have been building bridges. He reached up and took her hand. I cannot undo the past. But I can choose the future. And I choose you. I choose change. I choose to be the alpha this pack deserves, even if it costs me everything. Even if it costs me my life. Tears streamed down Aino's face. She had not cried during her punishment, had not cried when her power awakened, had not cried through all the pain and revelation. But this broke her. Stand, she whispered, tugging at his hand. Stand, Väinö. We face this together. As equals. He rose, and they stood facing each other, the mate bond blazing between them like a sun. And then, witnessed by the council, Aino placed her hand over Väinö's heart and spoke the ancient words that no one had heard in 3 centuries. By blood and moon, by power and choice, I claim you as mate. Not through submission but through partnership. Not through hierarchy but through love. The royal seal pulsed once, brilliant and blinding, and a mark appeared on Väinö's chest. Not the full seal, but an echo of it, a crown of silver that marked him as consort to royalty. By blood and moon, Väinö repeated, his voice rough with emotion. By power and choice I claim you as mate. Not as possession but as partner. Not as alpha over omega, but as soul meeting soul. The marks on both their bodies flared, and the mate bond snapped into place with such force that every wolf in the packhouse felt it. A wave of power rolled outward from the alpha's chambers, carrying with it the unmistakable message. The Silver Pine pack had a Luna. And she was royal. Väinö pulled Aino into his arms, careful of her still healing wounds, and kissed her forehead with a tenderness that seemed impossible from the same man who had wielded the whip less than a day ago. But people could change. People could heal. That was the whole point, wasn't it? So, Kaleva said, breaking the charged silence with a slight smile. I suppose we should prepare for war. The delegations arrived within 3 days, exactly as the rogues had predicted. First came the Ironwood pack, led by Alpha Ratio, a hulking man of 50 with a scarred face and eyes like chips of stone. He brought 20 warriors with him, all of them battle-hardened from the territorial wars, all of them radiating barely contained aggression. I heard an interesting rumor, Ratio said as he stood in the Silver Pine's formal receiving hall. His gaze swept the room, lingering on Aino where she sat beside Väinö's throne. Her throne had been brought in overnight, carved hastily but beautifully, positioned at the same height as the Alpha's. Cool. Rumor says you've got yourself a royal, Väinö. And here I thought we'd hunted those abominations to extinction. Väinö's expression remained neutral, but his hand tightened on the arm of his throne. Aino is my mate. She is Luna of the Silver Pine pack. And she is under my protection. Your protection, Ratio repeated and laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. Boy, do you understand what you're harboring? That mark on her skin is a declaration of war against everything we've built. Against the natural order itself. The natural order, Aino said, speaking for the first time, is not what you've made it. The hierarchy you cling to is barely 3 centuries old. Before the purge, before the royal families were slaughtered, packs functioned differently. More fairly. Ratio's gaze snapped to her, and there was murder in those stone eyes. You will not speak in the presence of Alpha's Omega. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Väinö was on his feet in an instant, his alpha power flooding outward with crushing force. You will address my Luna with respect, or you will leave my territory. Immediately. For a long moment, the 2 alphas stared at each other, power crackling in the air between them. Then Ratio smiled, a predator's smile, all teeth and no warmth. So it's true then. You've been compromised. The mate bond has made you weak. He shook his head with mock sadness. Your father would be ashamed. My father, Väinö said coldly, is dead. And the pack he left me was dying too. Slowly, from the inside out, as omegas starved and cruelty masqueraded as strength. Aino didn't compromise me. She woke me up. Woke you up to what? Softness. Mercy. Ratio spat the words like curses. Those are luxuries, Väinö. Luxuries that will get your people killed when harder times come. No, Aino said, rising from her throne. The royal seal blazed on her shoulder, visible even through the elegant dress she now wore. Cruelty is what will get people killed, because a pack built on oppression is a pack divided. And a divided pack cannot stand against true threats. She descended from the dais, walking toward Ratio with a grace that seemed impossible for someone who had been whipped near death 3 days prior. The rogues had been right. The royal seal was healing her at a supernatural rate, burning away damage and replacing it with ancient strength. You call the hierarchy natural, Aino continued. But nature doesn't create omega wolves to suffer. Nature creates different strengths, different gifts. Some wolves are built for leading, others for healing, others for enduring, for supporting, for holding communities together through their quiet strength. She stopped a few feet from Ratio, and though she was smaller than him, seemed somehow more substantial. The hierarchy isn't natural. It's a choice. And it's a choice that serves the few at the expense of the many. Pretty words, Ratio growled. But words won't protect you when the other packs come. And they will come royal. Every alpha who values order, who understands that the strong must rule, they will come for you. And when they do, your boy Alpha won't be able to save you. Then it's fortunate, said a new voice from the doorway, that she won't be relying only on him. Everyone turned to see Kukka, Tavi, and Aino standing at the entrance to the hall. But they weren't alone. Behind them stood at least 30 wolves, all of them wearing the ragged clothes of rogues, all of them bearing themselves with the unmistakable bearing of warriors. Who in the moon's name are you? Ratio demanded. We are the old guard, Kukka said, stepping forward. Descendants of those who swore oaths to the royal bloodline. For 300 years our families have been scattered, hiding, waiting. But the royal seal has awakened. And so we answer the call. Tavi moved to stand beside her. We are not many. Perhaps 200 across all territories. But we are trained, we are dedicated, and we will defend the royal blood with our lives. As our ancestors did. As we were born to do. Ratio's face had gone purple with rage. This is an outrage. You would bring rogues into your territory, Väinö. You would arm them, legitimize them. This is exactly the kind of chaos the hierarchy prevents. The hierarchy, Väinö said, his voice like ice, created them. Every wolf standing in that doorway was cast out for crimes like feeding the hungry, protecting the weak, questioning injustice. They are rogues because they wouldn't bend to tyranny, which makes them exactly the kind of wolves I want in my pack. He looked at Kukka and her companions. The old guard is welcome here. You may take the oath and join the Silverpine pack officially, with all the rights and protections that entails. We will need your strength in the days ahead. Ratio took a step back, his hand moving to the blade at his hip. His warriors tensed, ready for violence. You've chosen your side then, Ratio said. You've chosen to shelter an abomination, to tear down the order that has kept our kind strong for centuries. So be it. He turned toward the door, then paused and looked back. Within the month, every pack that values tradition will converge on your borders. We will demand you surrender the royal. And when you refuse, and I know you will refuse, we will take her by force. And we will burn this entire territory to the ground as a lesson to any other fool who thinks compassion is strength. Then we will be ready, Aino said quietly. And perhaps, when the dust settles, the world will see that there is another way. A better way. Ratio laughed one last time, harsh and mocking, then strode from the hall with his warriors trailing behind him. The moment they were gone, the entire room seemed to exhale. That went well, Kaleva said dryly. He's right about one thing, Väinö said, moving to stand beside Aino and taking her hand. They will come. Multiple packs, maybe as many as a dozen. We need to prepare. Not just prepare, Aino said. We need to show them an alternative. We need to prove that our way works. Over the next 2 weeks, the Silver Pine territory transformed. The Omega quarters were renovated, walls repaired, heating improved. Food distribution was reorganized with input from every circle, ensuring that no one went hungry. Training grounds that had been restricted to ranked wolves were open to all, with the old guard serving as instructors. And changes came swiftly. Omegas who had spent their lives cowering began to stand taller. Children like Helka, who had known only hunger and fear, started to laugh again. The lower circles, so long ignored, began to feel like part of the pack rather than its victims. But it wasn't easy. There was resistance from some of the ranked wolves, those who had thrived under the old system and saw the changes as threats to their status. Arguments broke out. Challenges were issued. Twice, Väinö had to personally intervene when Gammas tried to enforce the old rules, claiming that the Omega insurgents, that's what they called it, was destroying pack cohesion. Change is never comfortable, Lempi told Väinö one evening as they watched Aino teaching a group of young Omegas basic self-defense moves in the training yard. You take away people's familiar cruelties, and they feel lost, like the ground has shifted beneath them. How do I help them adjust? Väinö asked. How do I make them understand? You don't, the elder said simply. Some will adjust on their own when they see that the pack is stronger, not weaker. Some will need time and patience. And some, she shrugged. Some will never accept it. Will leave or cause trouble until they're forced out. That's the price of change, Alpha. Not everyone comes with you. Väinö nodded slowly, watching his mate. His Luna, laughing as she demonstrated a blocking technique to a girl of perhaps 15. The girl was skinny, malnourished, clearly weak. But there was determination in her eyes now. Oh, it's worth it, he said quietly. Whatever comes, it's worth it. And then, exactly as predicted, the other packs arrived. They came in force. Not delegations this time, but armies. The Ironwood Pack, the Shadow Peak Pack, the Riverside Pack, the Northwind Pack. 9 packs in total, their warriors spreading across the borders of Silver Pine territory like a noose tightening. They sent a messenger with their demands. Surrender the royal, disband the reforms, exile the old guard, and restore proper hierarchy. Or face total war. Väinö called a pack meeting in the Great Circle, where this had all begun less than a month ago. Every Silver Pine wolf attended, from the highest beta to the newest Omega. And standing at the center side by side were the Alpha and his Luna. You know what they demand, Väinö said, his voice carrying to every corner of the grounds. You know what they threaten. And you deserve to have a say in how we respond. Silence. Then, from the back of the crowd, a young Omega voice called out, We fight! Others picked up the cry. Not just Omegas but wolves from every circle. Even some of the Gammas who had been resistant to change were nodding, their faces set with determination. If we fight, Väinö said honestly, many of us will die. 9 packs against 1. The odds are not in our favor. Then we die proving something matters more than survival, Aino said, stepping forward. The royal seal blazed on her shoulder, and her voice carried that harmonic quality that made every wolf listen. We die proving that some things, justice, compassion, equality, are worth fighting for. Worth dying for. She looked around at the assembled pack, at the faces that had become so dear to her in such a short time. But I don't want any of you to die for me. If I surrender, if I go with them. No, came a chorus of voices. Kaleva stepped forward, followed by Tully, by Lempi, by Kukka and the old guard. You are our Luna, Kaleva said firmly. And more than that, you are our hope. Hope that things can be different. Better. We will not surrender that hope. We will not surrender you. The pack roared its agreement. Väinö pulled Aino close, and the mate bond between them sang with emotion. Fear, yes, but also love and pride and fierce determination. Then we fight, he said. Not for territory or resources or pride. We fight for the right to be better than we were. For the right to change. For the future we want to build. He raised his voice to address them all. Tomorrow 9 packs will test our resolve. Tomorrow we face what may be our end. But tonight we are pack. Tonight we are family. Tonight we are everything the old hierarchy said we could never be. And that is worth celebrating. What followed was unlike any pack gathering in Silverpine history. Ranked wolves and omegas shared food as equals. Children played together without regard for status. The old guard told stories of the time before the purge, when royals had ruled with wisdom rather than dominance. And in the center of it all, Väinö and Aino danced, a traditional mate dance, but modified, each leading and following in turn. Cool. Partners. I love you, Väinö said as they moved together under the stars. I don't know when it happened. Maybe that first moment in the judgment circle, when you looked at me with defiance in your eyes. Maybe when you stood and spoke truth even knowing what it would cost. Or maybe it was always inevitable, written in our bones by the moon goddess herself. I love you too, Aino said, and her eyes shimmered with tears. Even when I hated you, even when you hurt me, the bond knew what we would become, what we could be together. They kissed then, deep and desperate, knowing that tomorrow might tear them apart forever. Dawn came too quickly. The 9 packs arranged themselves at the borders, their forces spread in a crescent that enclosed the Silverpine territory on 3 sides. Hundreds of warriors, all of them battle-ready, all of them prepared to crush this rebellion against the natural order. Alpha Ratio stood at the forefront, flanked by the other 8 alphas. They were an imposing sight, power and strength personified, the embodiment of dominance that had ruled their kind for 3 centuries. Facing them across a stretch of neutral ground were the Silverpine forces, pitifully small in comparison, perhaps 150 wolves total, including the old guard and some omegas who had insisted on fighting despite having no training. Väinö stood at their head, with Aino beside him. She wore armor now, light but functional, provided by the old guard. The royal seal was visible on her shoulder, blazing bright enough to be seen from hundreds of yards away. Last chance, Ratio called across the distance. Surrender the royal. Restore the hierarchy. And we will withdraw. Väinö's answer was to shift, a massive black wolf with ice-blue eyes, radiating alpha power. Around him, the Silverpine pack shifted as well, a wave of transformation rippling through their ranks. Aino remained human a moment longer. She closed her eyes, feeling the power of the royal seal coursing through her, and spoke, not loudly, but her words carried on a wind that seemed to come from nowhere. Moon goddess, mother of wolves, if what we fight for is right, if this change is your will, then grant us your blessing. Grant us your strength. Not to destroy but to defend. Not to conquer but to prove. The royal seal exploded with light. And from that light came something no wolf had seen in 300 years. The royal shift. Aino's transformation was nothing like a normal shift. Golden light enveloped her, and when it faded, she stood as a wolf of impossible beauty. Her fur was silver-white, shot through with veins of gold. Her eyes blazed with that ancient power. And she was large, not as large as an alpha, but far larger than any omega should be. The mark on her shoulder remained visible even in wolf form, pulsing with light. The effect on the assembled armies was instantaneous. Wolves on both sides felt it. A pull, a recognition, something that bypassed hierarchy and spoke directly to the oldest parts of their souls. This was royalty. This was what they had been before the purge twisted them into the system they now served. Ratio snarled and gave the signal to attack. The 9 packs surged forward. The battle that followed was chaos. Teeth and claws, blood and fury. The Silverpine forces were outnumbered more than 4 to 1, but they fought with a desperation and unity that their enemies lacked. Omegas who had never been allowed to train proved they had been underestimated. The old guard moved with precision born of generations of preparation. And Aino was everywhere at once, or so it seemed. The royal shift had granted her speed and strength beyond normal wolves. But more than that, it had granted her something else. The ability to sense where her pack needed her most. A young Omega was being overwhelmed by 3 ironwood warriors. Aino was there, driving them back with golden fury. A section of the line was collapsing. She rallied them with a howl that carried courage like a physical force. Wolves who fell were touched by her power and found the strength to rise again. Väinö fought like a demon, protecting his pack, protecting his mate. His black wolf was a blur of lethal efficiency, taking down enemy after enemy. But even he could see they were losing. Slowly, inexorably, the numbers were telling. And then something extraordinary happened. Wolves from the attacking packs began to stop fighting. First one, then another, then dozens. They stood apart from the battle, watching Aino with something like wonder in their eyes. An ironwood warrior shifted back to human form and called out, "She's protecting the weak. The royal is defending omegas." Just like the old stories, another voice added, this one from the Shadow Peak pack. More wolves stopped, shifting back, confused and conflicted. They had been taught that royals were abominations, threats to be destroyed. But what they were witnessing didn't match that narrative. What they saw was a royal putting herself in harm's way to protect the lowest-ranked wolves. What they saw was everything the hierarchy had promised to be but never was. "Keep fighting," Roshio roared. "She's deceiving you. It's a trick." But his own warriors were hesitating now, questioning. Aino, seeing this moment of doubt, shifted back to human form. She stood in the center of the battlefield, bloodied but unbowed, and her voice rang out with royal authority. "I am Aino, bearer of the royal seal, last of the ancient bloodline. And I offer you a choice." She turned slowly, addressing wolves from all 9 packs. "You can continue this fight. You can kill me, kill every wolf here who dared to question your hierarchy. And then you can return to your territories and tell yourselves it was necessary. That order has been preserved." She paused, letting that sink in. "Or you can ask yourselves why your alphas are so afraid of change that they would slaughter an entire pack to prevent it. What is it about treating omegas as equals that threatens them so deeply? What is it about compassion that terrifies them?" "Don't listen to her." Roshio started forward, but several of his own warriors moved to block him, not threateningly but firmly. "Let her speak," one of them said. "We came to fight an abomination. But I'm not sure that's what this is." Aino continued. "The hierarchy tells you that strength means dominance, that leadership means control, that to show mercy is to show weakness. But look at the Silver Pine pack." She gestured to her wolves, bloodied and exhausted but standing together. "Look at omegas who were never allowed to train, fighting with courage equal to any warrior. Look at wolves from every circle united not by fear of punishment, but by genuine loyalty, by love." She placed a hand over her heart, over the mark that bound her to Väinö. "3 weeks ago I was nothing. Worse than nothing. I was an omega condemned to exile and death. But my alpha, my mate, made a choice to see past the hierarchy, to see me as a person, not a rank. And that choice changed everything." Väinö shifted back to human form and came to stand beside her, taking her hand. "She changed me," he said, addressing the assembled wolves. "Made me face the fact that I had become the very thing I feared, a tyrant who confused cruelty with strength. And yes, our reforms have been difficult. Yes, there has been resistance. But I can tell you with absolute certainty that my pack is stronger now than it has ever been. Not despite treating omegas as equals, but because of it." Kaleva shifted and joined them. Then Tuli. Then Lempi, ancient and frail but standing with absolute conviction. One by one, every silver pine wolf shifted back to human form and stood with their Alpha and Luna, presenting a united front. And then, impossibly, wolves from the attacking packs began to cross the lines. First a few, then more. Omegas mostly but not exclusively. They came forward and knelt before Aino, heads bowed. "I want to join you," one young woman said, her voice shaking. "I want to be part of a pack where I matter, where my life has value." "We all do," said another, and suddenly there were dozens of voices calling out similar sentiments. The alphas of the 9 packs looked at each other in horror, watching their unity crumble. This was worse than losing a battle. This was losing the ideological war. Their wolves were choosing the royal over them. "This is treason," Roshio roared. "All of you will be." "Will be what?" Aino interrupted, her voice sharp. "Punished for wanting to be treated like people. Exiled for choosing hope over oppression." She shook her head. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. The hierarchy's only answer to dissent is violence and fear." She addressed the wolves who had crossed to her side. "Any who wish to join the Silverpine pack are welcome. You will be equal here. You will be valued. But understand this will not be easy. The packs you leave will call you traitors. This territory may face more attacks. The road ahead is uncertain. Anything is better than going back," one of the new wolves said, and the others nodded agreement. The 9 alphas stood together, facing the reality that they had lost. Not through superior force, but through the simple truth that their system was cruel and unnecessary. That there was another way. "This isn't over," one of the other alphas said, Miko of the Shadow Peak pack. "You think you've won, but all you've done is paint a target on your back. More packs will come. The Council of Alphas will." "The Council of Alphas," Aino said, and her voice carried that harmonic quality again, "will have to acknowledge that change is coming whether they want it or not. The royal seal has awakened. The old bloodline has returned. And with it comes the truth they've been trying to suppress for 300 years. That hierarchy based on oppression is not sustainable. Eventually it collapses, either through rebellion or through rot from within." She stepped forward, and even the alphas took an involuntary step back from the power radiating from her. "But I am not your enemy. I don't want to destroy the packs or tear down all leadership. I want to transform them. To remind us all of what we were before the purge, when royals and alphas worked together, when every wolf had value regardless of their rank." "And if we refuse?" Roshio asked, though his voice had lost its conviction. "Then you refuse," Aino said simply. "I will not force change at the point of a claw, but I will offer it. I will stand as proof that there is another way. And I will welcome any wolf, from any pack, who wants to be part of building something better." There was a long, tense silence. Then, surprising everyone, Alpha Miko of the Shadow Peak pack shifted back to human form. "I want to talk," he said. "Not now, not here, but soon. I want to understand how your reforms work. Whether they're sustainable. Whether—" he paused, struggling with the words. "Whether there truly is a better way." Väinö inclined his head. "You would be welcome at Silverpine. To observe, to ask questions. No tricks, no traps. Just honest conversation about how we govern ourselves." Miko nodded slowly, then turned and began walking back toward his forces. The other alphas followed, some angry, some thoughtful, all of them shaken. Roshio was the last to leave. He stared at Aino with undisguised hatred, but also with something that might have been fear. "This isn't finished," he said. "No," Aino agreed. "It's just beginning." The meeting hall was packed to capacity. 6 months after the battle that wasn't, or perhaps was the most important battle of all, representatives from 15 different packs had come to Silverpine territory. Some were allies like Miko of Shadow Peak, who had slowly begun implementing reforms in his own pack. Others were skeptics, here to see if the Silverpine experiment had crashed and burned as they predicted. And sitting at the head of the table, side by side on equal thrones, were Alpha Väinö and Luna Aino. Aino was fully healed now. Her scars faded to silver lines that she wore with pride. The royal seal on her shoulder had become part of her, no longer blazing constantly but pulsing with soft light when she was emotional or using her power. She wore fine clothes now, befitting her station, but her bearing was the same, humble but unbreakable, gentle but fierce. Väinö had changed too. The ice had melted from his eyes, replaced by warmth and humor. He smiled more, laughed more, led with compassion balanced by strength, consulting with his pack on major decisions rather than handing down edicts from on high. "Let's begin," Väinö said, calling the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming. I know it was a long journey for many of you." "We're curious," one alpha admitted. Ilmatar of the Riverside Pack, a woman of 40 with shrewd eyes. "We've heard rumors. Some say your territory has descended into chaos. Others say you've created paradise. We wanted to see for ourselves." "Judge for yourselves," Aino said, gesturing to Kaleva. "Our beta has prepared a report on the changes we've implemented and their effects on pack cohesion, resource management, and overall welfare." What followed was hours of detailed discussion. The numbers told a compelling story. Crime within the pack was down 40%. Illness was down 30%. Productivity in all areas, hunting, building, trade, was up. The omega population, which had been dying out from neglect, was not only stable but thriving. "But what about challenges to authority?" one skeptical alpha asked. "Surely when you treat omegas as equals, they begin to challenge their betters." "Challenges have actually decreased," Väinö said. "Because wolves who feel valued, who feel heard, don't need to rebel. They're part of the system rather than victims of it. When we have disputes, we resolve them through council discussion rather than through dominance displays." "And the omegas can really fight now?" another alpha asked, sounding almost nervous. "They can defend themselves," Aino corrected gently. "There's a difference. We're not trying to turn every omega into a warrior. We're giving them the tools to protect themselves and contribute to pack defense if they choose to. Some do, some don't. Just like ranked wolves." Miko of Shadow Peak spoke up. "I've been implementing similar reforms in my territory for the past 4 months. I won't lie, there was resistance. Some of my gammas left, unwilling to accept the changes. But the wolves who stayed, who embraced the new system." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My pack feels different now. More unified. Stronger, despite the fact that we're treating omegas better. Because," Lempi said from where she sat as an honored elder advisor, "strength doesn't come from oppressing those below you. True strength comes from unity. From every member of the pack knowing they matter, that they have value, that they will be protected and cared for." The meeting continued deep into the night. Some alphas left unconvinced, clinging to their hierarchies. But others, more than Aino had dared hope, left thoughtful, considering, planning. Later, after the formal meetings had ended and most visitors had retired to guest quarters, Aino and Väinö walked the borders of their territory under the full moon. "Do you think it will work?" Väinö asked, holding her hand. "Do you think we can really change how all the packs operate?" "Not all," Aino said honestly. "Some will cling to the old ways until they destroy themselves. But enough will change. Enough will see that there's a better path. And over time, maybe generations, the world will transform." She stopped walking and turned to face him, placing both hands over his heart where the echo of her royal seal marked him. "You gave me something I never had before. Oh, the belief that change is possible. That even the most entrenched systems can be challenged." "You gave me back my soul," Väinö countered. "Reminded me that being a leader doesn't mean being a tyrant. That I could be strong and compassionate. That I could rule with my heart as well as my head." They kissed under the moonlight, the bond between them singing with love and contentment. A sound made them turn. Little Helka, now 8 years old and far healthier than she had been, was running toward them with a group of other Omega children. They were playing some elaborate game, laughing and shouting, completely unself-conscious. "Luna Aino," Helka called out when she spotted them. "Will you tell us a story? About the old times before the purge?" Aino smiled and gestured for the children to gather around. They settled in the grass, looking up at her with rapt attention. Not because she was royal, not because they feared her, but because they loved her. "Once upon a time," Aino began, "before the world forgot how to be kind, there were packs where every wolf mattered. Where strength meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Where leadership meant service, not dominance." As she spoke, More wolves drifted over to listen. Adults from all circles, old guard members. Even some of the visiting alphas who couldn't resist the pull of her voice. And Väinö watched his mate. His Luna, his love, weaving the story of what had been and what could be again. Planting seeds of change in every heart that listened. Ratio had been wrong, he thought. This wasn't the end of their way of life. It was the beginning of something far better. The story of Aino and Väinö became legend. Not the kind of legend written in official pack histories. Those were still controlled by the old powers, the resistant alphas who refused to acknowledge that change was inevitable. But it lived in the stories told around Omega fires. In the whispers of hope passed from parent to child. In the secret name that spread across territories like wildfire. The omegaqueen. She never claimed that title. Never wanted it. But wolves gave it to her anyway because she represented something they desperately needed to believe in. That you could be born into nothing and become everything. That your worth wasn't determined by your rank. That even the most powerless could change the world. More packs began to reform. Slowly, gradually, but unmistakably. The tide was turning. And sometimes, late at night, when Aino stood under the moon with one hand pressed to the royal seal on her shoulder, she could feel them. Other dormant bloodlines beginning to wake. Other royals, hidden among the Omega populations. Their power suppressed but not extinguished. She was not the last after all. She was the first of a new age. The first crack in a dam that had held back justice for 300 years. The first light in a darkness that had lasted far too long. And when she turned to Väinö, found him watching her with those ice-blue eyes that now blazed with love, she knew with absolute certainty. Some things were worth fighting for. Some changes were worth dying for. And some bonds, between mates, between pack members, between wolves who dared to dream of equality, were strong enough to transform the world. The royal seal had awakened. And the world would never be the same. And that, my friends, is the story of how an Omega condemned to punishment became the catalyst for revolution. How an alpha who wielded the whip learned to wield compassion. How a bond forged in pain became the foundation for transformation. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about power and justice, about cruelty and kindness, about the systems we accept without questioning, then please hit that like button. Share this story. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another tale. Virtual hug to every single one of you who made it through this journey with Aino and Väinö. Whether you're in New York or Tokyo or London, Sydney or Sao Paulo, you're part of this community. You're part of this pack. And in this pack, everyone matters. Everyone has value. Everyone deserves their chance to rise. Until next